Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing The Beast. This film was directed by Bertrand Bonello. I think people who watch me regularly know that I am a huge fan of Bertrand Bonello's work. I'm always intrigued when he has a new project coming out. Whenever he is at his best, I think he's made some of the best films of the last 10, 15 years. His film House of Tolerance, as an example, I think was my top film of the decade, of its respective decade. So naturally, The Beast has been on my radar for a while, and I've been very excited to see it, obviously, but also very intimidated just because Bertrand Bonello films are very dense mechanically and otherwise, and that makes it really hard to develop thoughts after you've only seen it one time. I think anytime I've reviewed a Bonello film on this channel anyway, I've given it at least 3 watches before I feel comfortable, and I don't have that luxury here, but I guess that's part of the challenge of being a reviewer. Yeah, I will say, I think this movie is incredibly overwhelming on an initial viewing. I think it's maybe Bonello's most ambitious work, at least that I have seen. It is inspired by an early 20th century novella by Henry James, but it's like by way of Cloud Atlas so far as how we're interpreting the themes, which, the themes on the surface, I would say, are very simple and very universal. This is about 2 people who are romantically attracted to each other, but just always throughout the movie there is this fear of existential dread. There's something always lurking in the shadows, some sort of paranoia that is keeping the 2 of these people from ever allowing that romantic attraction to be fully realized. Though I will say Bonello seems to be up to his typical tricks with this one at the same time, because this movie stars Léa Seydoux and George McKay, and they are the 2 romantic prospects, but they're playing these parts in 3 different time periods. So it's like the first one is in the early 20th century, so it's like, I think, 1910, and then the second one is in 2014, and then finally 2044. As usual, he is finding the repetitions within human behavior throughout time, but also how our environments and how our circumstances can shape us, how they change the course of our lives, how they can change the outcome of, yes, a very important romantic encounter. He seems to be very interested in how a particular time period, how that particular society can cage the human beings that are brought up within that world, and how it can often hinder them from their potential. But it's very meta. I would say he's always studying how these themes are filtered through cinematic illusions and all these different influences that he has. Yes, it is daunting, but it's also a very bizarre experience to watch. It's a very glitchy type of movie. I don't really know how to explain that other than, yeah, it's like when you're watching it, at times it's like the images are still rendering, even though it's like the movie's actually going on at the same time. So yeah, it's very experimental and very modern in that sense. I know I've said this on many occasions when I talk about Bertrand Bonello, but it's just an image that I can't help but think about always. I think when his movies are really harmonious, when they're really working for me, it's like seeing a particular reflection of a person or an image, whatever it is, but it's like in a room of mirrors. But it's not a typical room of mirrors where, everything's in a row or something like that. It's like the mirrors are kind of jutting out from each other. So there's this weird overlap to the experience. So the image that you're seeing, it's like no matter what angle you see it at, it's going to be different. It's going to be a little bit distorted. And that might be very strange at first to sort out, but once you have stepped back and absorbed the whole thing, it can be absolutely spectacular. At times watching this movie, it did have kind of a disjointed feeling to it, or certain ideas felt a little bit underdeveloped than others, or certain storylines felt underdeveloped compared to others. I felt maybe some loose ends at times. So I'm constantly asking myself while I'm watching the movie, does the ambition of this movie with multi-time periods, past lives, this whole science fiction angle, is it providing a perspective, a unique perspective on these universal themes, or is it a little bit overwrought, where we're kind of overworking a lot of cinematic elements where it's not necessary? But I have to tell you, no matter what I felt, whether it was a complaint or whether I felt confused or frustrated at certain points, I was always intrigued by everything, and I could see myself saying, wait a minute, if I give this another watch, I think this concept here has the potential to blossom in my mind. And that's kind of how I feel. It's like when I watch a Bonello film for the first time, I'm working through the mechanics of it, and it's not always a smooth ride, but once I find the rhythm of it, however off-kilter it can be, then I'll find myself being able to settle in with ease. Certainly I found myself thinking about this movie a lot after it was over, but it's still growing in my mind more and more. And I think I'm just very intrigued by the premise, the idea of when you meet somebody that you've never met before, and it's like the connection is so instantaneous, the energy is so cosmic, it's so intense, it's like you feel like your world is shook up, or maybe the entire world, the whole time continuum is just broken. It's like the planets aligned perfectly in this moment for this moment to work out, and you start to think to yourself, I feel like I've known you forever. I feel like I've known you in a past life. Maybe not even as a lover, but we were connected in some form, and we're going to be in future lives. We're just going to reverberate. It's an intense feeling. And I think in order for that to work, you do have to find a certain flow and a piercing center that is going to anchor us within all of this turbulence and confusion. And that anchor for us in this movie is Léa Seydoux, who I think is one of the great cinematic performers. Reminds me a lot of like Monica Vitti, from like the 1960s. She was a great European actress of her time. I think of movies like The Day of Wrath, which is a movie from the 1940s by Carl Dreyer, a very underrated movie. The actress in that film, Lisbeth Moven, I think does maybe the greatest performance I've ever seen from an actress, at least for me. If they were going to remake that film, it would have to be Léa Seydoux playing the part. I can't see anybody else doing it. That is absolutely a compliment to Léa Seydoux's performance ability, but it's almost as if she's not really acting. I think she's just instinctually revealing something within the soul that just comes out through the eyes, through her face. It is the kind of face that, yeah, I feel like it can translate into any era, and that's why it's so great for this role. It's like she is frozen in time, which is, very different from her co-star, George McKay. He is somebody who seems to mold himself more into these respective time periods like a chameleon. And it's like, that it's still the same person, but, you kind of have to, for a second, think about it. At first, I was not sure how I responded to McKay as a performer, especially when it comes to having to go against somebody like Léa Seydoux, but I found myself warming to him more and more with time. There's something about him that is, it is handsome, and yet there's a weird, there's something a little off about him. There's like a weird mania in his eyes, or the potential for it. So there's always this undercurrent of unease, but you can't quite put your finger on it, and that's very important. In the early section of the movie, the 1910 section, he's performing the character with like this charm and this intelligence, a forthrightness, where he's very kind of direct to Léa's character. That frankness with which he's confronting her, yes, it's very intriguing. It's very sexy because he is the dominant one in this situation. But then we get into the 2014 section of the film, and suddenly the McKay character is an incel, this young virgin character who is heavily inspired by Elliot Rodger, handsome guy, well off, couldn't get a girl, so he goes on a murder rampage. So in this instance, he is meeting Léa in a completely different circumstance where she is like this working model, and yet he has this bitterness to her and like this misogyny, obviously, towards all women. He wants to kill her. And I have to say, I think he perfectly inhabited this particular character in contrast to the ones before. I feel like he felt born to play a character like this, and that's not going to seem like a compliment, but I do mean it like as a compliment. Though again, I'm not sure how the chemistry is always working between them. Sometimes it's like you can really feel the fire, and other times it feels a little bit mismatched. I do know that he was not the original choice for the role, and it was tragic circumstances that led to him being cast, because the original actor did pass away. But it's just interesting that they went with such a different energy compared to the initial actor that they chose. I think the 2014 section is the most fully realized and maybe the best section of the movie, and I think that is by design. It settles more into the horror elements, which I think Bonello is very comfortable with at this point in his career. And it did feel like a lot of recycled elements from Lost Highway. I would say this is a commentary on how technology creates alienation, especially when it comes to the sexes, masculine versus feminine expectations, and how they do change. And then you have the framework, the story, the section that is taking place in 2044, and that is bringing in the whole AI conversation, which is obviously very loaded. But it is what sets the story in motion. It is the idea of Léa getting this procedure where she can kind of go through all of her past lives and find the connections, and then she can kind of cleanse herself of them and then be rid of those emotions. I did feel like that section was maybe the most underdeveloped for me, where it felt like it was posing a lot more questions than it could answer, or at least contemplate with some conviction. But it also really makes me want to revisit the film, understanding that it's like the AI is always in control, in a sense, throughout the movie, because it's changing the way we perceive all of these past lives, because it's their procedure, and thus they are the ones filtering it. They are the ones with the sense of control. Visually, this section was very cool. Obviously, like I said, it is very Lynchian, but it also had a kind of a Cronenberg dystopian thing going on. Like I said, this movie feels like some sort of abstract funhouse that is filtered through some sort of digital app that is malfunctioning at the same time. It's just more dreamy. It feels like there's a lot more shadows. It's spotty, where the mind can't fill in all the blanks of memory. But then even that brings in a whole nother element to the movie, the idea of illusions and symbols, and how they can become a representation or a manifestation of our deepest fears that we are creating. In this movie, I don't think the beast is a warning in the form of like a black bird coming into a house like they do show us. But even though that symbol does feel more palpable to us and seductive to us compared to maybe coming up with the realization ourselves that maybe I am the beast. And the movie will take you to all kinds of places that you really aren't expecting. It is winding. At times it is a very troubling experience, but I could never pull away from it. This movie feels rooted in multiple worlds. It has an affinity for classical romantic eras of the past, but it's also mixed with more like modern pastiche elements, film influences all over the place, but garbled through a modern performance art exhibition. As we are adding in all of these different layers, I started to think to myself, maybe Bonillo is creating all of these like roundabout, very complicated elements in order to just kind of shed them in the final moments of the movie on purpose. And yeah, I'm very interested to see how people receive that ending. I think some people are going to feel very cheated by it, and other people are going to find it heartbreaking. Despite my struggles with the film at times, I found myself aching in the final moments. There's something satisfying about it because when it comes to love, it's like it feels like such a complicated journey all the way to this very simple response, yes or no. And at the end of the film, I don't think this is a spoiler or anything, but you don't even get a credit sequence. Well, you do, but it's actually a QR code. You have to hold your phone up and then you can, yeah, watch the credits as you leave the theater, which, yeah, as I said, very modern. This man is adding, more levels to the post-modern discussion. As much as I might find myself questioning stray observations or certain elements of the movie, there is a magnetic force in this movie that is unwavering, and it constantly has me questioning all of those skepticisms I have. This is a cinephile's movie, so I think you know if this is going to be the type of movie you want to see or not, just based on the premise that I shared at the beginning. If you love art house cinema, if you love Bertrand Bonello, you like French cinema, that type of thing, then yeah, you're going to love something like this because it is a challenging piece of cinema. Or this movie is going to be completely insufferable for you, and all of those experimental elements are going to wear out their welcome quickly. For myself, again, I feel very strange trying to give an ultimate opinion on whether I liked it or didn't after only seeing it one time, but I can tell you this much. I can tell you that this is easily the most intriguing film I have seen this year so far. Once I see it a second time or a third time, I think I can judge at that point whether I think it comes together like a movie like House of Tolerance, as an example. A movie that is not as ambitious, and yet it has so many similar themes. It feels very intact as an organism. So yes, that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website as always. It is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist, I do commissioned portraits, and I sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can go to the website below, and if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons who are great. Guys, thank you so much for your support, and welcome to all the new members. If you're interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.